Hi sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name's Beth. If you're new, welcome. Today I took some scraps, some leftover pieces from my last quilt, and I made a little sewing machine cover. Let's get started. My project today begins with these leftover triangles I had after cutting the edges off of my most recent project, this zigzag quilt, and I'll leave a link below for the video on that project. Rather than put these triangles away in storage, I sat down right away and I put them together in groups of 2 to make some squares. I wasn't sure how many squares I would be able to make, but I enjoyed sitting down, sewing them together, and getting started on a project. And I have been needing a cover for my sewing machine. My sewing machine is always out. I always have a sewing machine in this spot, and it should be covered when I'm not working, so I thought it'd be fun to put these together for a little sewing machine cover. My squares turned out very similar in size. Nothing was really exact though, so I trimmed all of my squares to 5.5 inches. Now the fun begins. I can lay out my little squares and move them around and kind of figure out how I'm going to design my little sewing machine cover. I know that I don't have enough squares to make a full cover, but I'm going to begin with this small patchwork piece. This is what I had when I was done, and I put it up to my machine to kind of see how I was doing with the size, and it was actually just right with the width, but I need a little bit more length to go over the back of the machine. So I took some more of my scraps and I made the second half of my sewing machine cover. These little squares were also leftovers from when I was making my quilt, so I was able to use almost every little piece left over to make this fun little project. When I had all of my pieces together, my small quilt here to cover my machine measured 21 inches wide by 28 inches to go over the top. I have my little quilted cover. It's actually not quilted yet, but it will be quilted. I have my little quilt ready to go. I think it's the right size, and now all I need to do is to figure out the sides. For making the sides, I decided to quilt and make a little quilt sandwich with some batting and some backing. I'm using a tiny bit of this 505 spray to keep things in place. I use very little of the spray, and it holds everything together while I quilt. For quilting lines, I just followed the seams and I sewed right next to some of those seams that go across all the way through this little quilt, and then for the triangles I did some diagonal lines as well. For the sides of my sewing machine cover, I'm using an old pair of jeans, and I'll be cutting 2 side pieces 12 inches by 5 inches. Pinned the side piece to my cover, and then I sewed all the way around using probably closer to a 1/2 inch seam, and I will have raw edges on the inside of my sewing machine cover. For the bottom of my sewing machine cover, I'm using this bias tape that comes packaged, and I'll open up one side and attach it to the back, and then I'll wrap it around to the front and top stitch all the way around. It was really fun taking leftovers from that quilt and putting them to good use. I like my sewing machine cover, and I like the randomness of all those pieces of fun fabric. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.